Now, imagine for a moment that you were in the place of the disciples of Jesus. I know we've done this a few times, and I think it's pretty profitable because, well, we shouldn't have to sit back and imagine if we're in the place of Jesus' disciples, because aren't we supposed to be his disciples? Right? So, imagine you are who you are. So, well, Jesus, he came along one day, right? And he says to you, cast aside your nets and follow him. And you did. Or maybe, Jeannie, he says, cast aside your books in your classroom and follow him. Let's think, Tim, cast aside your tools, lay them aside, and follow him, right? So you did it. You left your life behind to follow Jesus. Then every day, for the next few years, you follow him as he teaches you. He invests everything into you. He tells you he has come to bring new life. He tells you he is the long-awaited Redeemer. He tells you of the love he and the Father have for you. So you watch, and you can't help but watch with not just eyes, but eyes wide open, right? Because you've seen some pretty amazing things, okay? You see him perform miracles, and you've seen him teach the redeeming new life that he has come to offer. He says to you that one day, now this is when your eyes get really big, right? One day, he's going to leave you. No, they're not going to get big at that part, but the next part. When he does leave you, you will do greater works than he has ever done. Well, this is pretty great, right? You're going to do greater things than Jesus. Imagine the possibilities. You're going to change the world. You're going to be the hands and feet of God, proclaiming his majesty to a troubled world. You will convey the peace and life of Christ to the world. It's going to be pretty great, right? But somehow, in the midst of all that, you miss the message that Jesus was trying to convey. You thought when he said he was going to go away, it just meant that. He was going away. But Jesus didn't simply go away. Rather, he was crucified. Put to death as a criminal. And now, you're thrown completely off guard, right? You go into survival mode. In fact, when he's arrested, what happens? Well, he can't be arrested. So you run. Somehow, you don't remember the teachings of Jesus. You don't remember that he said that he was going to rise again. So you give up hope. You gather together and you lock yourself in a house, hidden from prying eyes, afraid of what those same authorities that killed Christ might do to you. Then all of a sudden, in the midst of all this fear, in the midst of all this concern, Jesus just suddenly shows up. Well, who let that guy in here? The door was locked. But wait a minute, I thought he was dead. Well, not anymore. Jesus rose again. He was the sacrificial lamb, the once and for all blood offering that redeemed us from our sins. And now we are all saved. But his rising from the dead means that not just are we made clean by this perfect sacrifice, right? But it means that death no longer has any power. It has been conquered. The consequences of sin are death, and Jesus has now destroyed it. We are now able to live with him forever. And so we say, great is the Christ, great is our God, right? Just like we've been singing, right? Jesus is Lord, my Redeemer. There it is, right? So now, Jesus shows up. You've had your discussion with him. You've seen him alive and walking around, right? Jesus is back. You're finally kind of putting things together. So what do you do next? Okay, now you've had your discussion with Jesus. What do you do? What do you do with your lives? Well, what do the disciples do with their lives? Well, they actually go right back to their lives as nothing has ever happened. Remember, Jesus started off and he said, cast aside your nets and follow me, right? Well, Jesus is gone, so let's pick up those nets again. Jesus comes by for another visit. He looks out on the water, and there they are. What are they doing fishing? Their sins are redeemed, their lives are changed forever, and they're still out fishing for fish. They have a message to proclaim to the world, and they've simply gone back to their previous way of life without a second thought. So, after Jesus produces another miracle, and he loads them up with more fish than they can handle, right? All right, if you want to fish for fish, well, let's get some fish then. Here you go. Try to bring that in. So he sits down and he has breakfast with them. Now just think for a moment, what was that table talk like? What was the topic of discussion there? Or rather, was it just a long, silent, awkward, don't meet his eyes kind of meal? Here's Christ the Redeemer, who just died and rose again, and he's having breakfast with you. What do you talk about? Do you say nothing at all? Who knows? But we do know one thing. After they finished breakfast, somebody was pulled aside to have a little chat. Right? Let's turn over to John chapter 21. John chapter 21. We'll start in verse 15 and read through to 19. John chapter 21, verse 15 through 19. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He said to him, "Feed my lambs." He said to him a second time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." He said to him, "Tend my sheep." He said to him the third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was grieved because he had said to him the third time, "Do you love me?" And so he said to him, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep. Truly, truly, I say to you, when you were young, you used to dress yourself and walk wherever you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and another will dress you and carry you where you do not want to go." This he said to show by what kind of death he was to glorify God. And after saying this, he said to him, "Follow me." It's kind of funny. It ends the way it started, right? Peter's first interaction with Jesus, "Follow me." Peter's last interaction with Jesus, "Follow me." Does anybody remember what Jesus did what Jesus did? Does anyone remember what Peter did while Jesus was before Caiaphas, the high priest? Right? Okay, before the rooster crows, denied him 3 times, right? It was actually before the rooster crowed twice. He denied him 3 times. Yeah, numbers all mixing up. So Peter was sitting outside, right? He wanted to be close, but he didn't want to be too close. Okay? He wanted to be associated with Jesus, but not associated enough that he got crucified with Jesus. He wasn't one of the 12. He was one of the 70, right? I wasn't part of the inner circle. I was just out here watching from a distance. So Peter sat outside listening for news alongside of the servants. Then one of the servants recognized his accent as Galilean. Then they realized, he's one of the disciples of Jesus. 3 times they asked him if he were a disciple of Jesus, and 3 times Peter denied Jesus, saying he did not even know who he was. In fact, one time he went so far as he brought a curse upon himself to try to make this so clear, right? Imagine if we were to... How do we bring this into our context, right? I mean, he goes, it's kind of like something like, "I swear on my mother's grave I do not know." Something like that, right? I mean, he brought a very strong affirmation that there is 0 chance of any way that he actually ever possibly crossed paths with this Jesus person. So, what is Jesus doing now when he pulls Peter aside and decides to have a talk with him? What is this all about? He asks him 3 times, Peter, do you love me? So is Jesus just rubbing salt in his wound? Yeah? Try and deny me now, you liar? No. But Jesus is opening up some wounds. But he is not bringing it up to say, why would you deny me? Rather, Jesus is saying, I have redeemed you even from this. What you did was kind of a big deal, right? Okay. Well, we're going to move past that. Jesus' death and resurrection, what was the purpose of that? To redeem him from even that. All of us have sinned, including Peter. And Jesus is showing Peter the glory of his death. Why did Jesus die? To redeem us from such mistakes as Peter's. But the key to what Jesus is doing to Peter is in the first question. Do you love me more than these? Well, what's these? What is the thing that Jesus was asking him, does he love him more than? I believe it would be reasonable to say that Jesus is asking Peter if he loves him more than his current life, his occupation, his everything. Right? Is Jesus first in his life? Jesus is saying, you have been saved. I redeemed you for a high price. Is this what you're going to do with it? With this life that I've paid for? What is the most important thing in your life? Me or your former way of living? If you truly love, then why are you just fishing for fish? Why are you going on like nothing's ever happened? Basically, are you going to let me change you, or is your life... Are you going to let me change you, or is your life going to be different? Or are you going to keep doing what you did before? How many of you have ever seen that movie Iron Man? It's got a scene that I kind of like in it. Well, not just a scene. I kind of like the movie, but there's this in the first one. There's this scene. Tony Stark, who's Iron Man, he gets abducted by terrorists. And he's put in prison. They want to build this big bomb thing or whatever. And when he's in prison, he finally figures out a way to escape. On his way, he's with this man who's also a prisoner with him, Jensen. And in the process of escaping, they realize that they've run out of time, right? They've run out of time to do what needs to be done, and there's no way that Tony can get everything together he needs to get together in order to escape without some kind of delay. So Jensen goes and he goes to buy time for Tony. But in the process, Jensen gets himself killed. But in Jensen's final breaths, he says to Tony, as Tony finds him, he says, don't waste it. Don't waste your life. Seemingly saying, okay, I gave up quite a bit here. Don't let it be for nothing. Right? Jensen basically said, I believe your life has value. Therefore, I'm willing to lay down mine for your sake. So don't waste it. Show the world that your life has value. Right? Be changed. And Jesus is saying the same kind of thing here. He's saying now to Peter, I've paid the greatest price for your life. I have lived my life and gone to the cross because I believe that your life has value. Don't waste it. You've been saved, so live like it. This is what it means to allow Jesus to take our world apart, as we talked about last week. Jesus says, if you love me, then feed my sheep. Now, he doesn't literally mean give them bread and make sure their stomachs are never empty. But he means, think back to John chapter 6, I am the bread of life. Jesus has redeemed all of mankind. He is the sustenance that gives us life. He is the one thing that will allow us to live forever. The one thing that will allow us never to be hungry. Jesus is saying, you have been fed, you have been redeemed, so now go and do likewise. Give the bread of life, which is Jesus, to all those who are hungry. As we live our lives, there's constantly a byproduct of our living. I know we've talked about this a few times in the past. There's a sort of exhaust, right? Okay, we see the big discussions today. We see those cars, you know, the garbage truck that hasn't had its oil changed in who knows how long, and you've got like the big puff of black falling behind it, and the road's clouded for the next 5 minutes as the smoke clears, right? And then we've got those cars which advertise, oh, what comes out of our tailpipe? This little clean water. You could drink this stuff, right? Not that I would. But we've all got some kind of exhaust coming out of us. If we're alive, then we must produce. We produce something. It's inevitable. It's unstoppable. If we look to the letters of Paul, we see it named fruits, right? If we're living for Christ, if we're living our faith, then we produce good fruits, right? Faith, hope, love, all those things. If we choose to live for ourselves, the flesh. If we choose to live in sin, then we produce death. That black smoke that you choke on, right? It's not God who pronounces death to us, but rather ourselves. To live for sin is to die. To turn on the engine of sin is to sputter out the exhaust of death. Jesus says, you have been saved. You've been redeemed. If you live like that, if you truly love me, then you'll produce the fruits of love. In this case, Jesus is saying that you will feed my sheep. If we love Christ, then we have no choice but to feed his sheep. If we love, then automatically food is produced for the sheep. If we love Christ, if we have faith, then we automatically shine his light. We can't help it. If we do not shine his light, then we have to ask ourselves the question, are we loving Christ? Jesus says, if you love me, Peter, then your life will be radically changed. If you love me, Peter, then you will never be the same. If you love me, Peter, then your world will be torn apart. This goes back to John 14:12, where Jesus tells his disciples, whoever believes in me will also do the works that I do, and greater things than this he will do. Well, imagine what Jesus has done. All these miracles that you have seen as a disciple. And Jesus says, if you believe in me, if you live your faith, you will do greater things than this. So what does it mean to do greater things than Jesus? Were the acts of miracles actually the greatest acts of Jesus? I mean, imagine all those who were healed, right? Everyone who was given bread to eat, right? Every single one of them, well, they were healed just so that they could die again. They were brought back from the dead, Lazarus, just so that they could die again. They were fed, just so that they could get hungry again. All right? The miracles of Jesus were temporary. So, by definition, something that doesn't last very long doesn't have as much value as something that lasts forever. I mean, there are times where that's not the case, but generally, no. The temporary does not outweigh the value of the permanent, right? It's not that the flowers that you give your wife has value, but it's the feeling and the joy that is expressed in that moment that has value, because that lasts a whole lot longer than the flowers, doesn't it? The great things of Christ were the changing hearts. The great things of Christ were those who were the most decrepit of society being redeemed and saved. These were the true miracles of Christ. Jesus is saying to Peter, if you love me, then you will feed my sheep. If you love me, then you will do greater things than I have done. If you love me, then you will lay down your nets and you will feed my sheep. If you love me, you'll create the greatest miracle of all. You will change hearts. You'll stop fishing for fish, and you'll start fishing for... I mean, remember, this is the Gospel of John that said, I will make you fishers of men, right? So what are they doing fishing fish? Jesus says, forget your previous life. Leave it all behind. He says, do not live for your life for yourself. Do not live your life for this world. If you love me, live your life as Jesus did. Live your life as a servant to everyone around you, giving it all up. Let your world be undone and turned upside down for the sake of feeding my sheep. And who are the sheep? Sheep are everyone in this world. The world belongs to the Father. It belongs to the King, who is Jesus. We are his sheep, and he loves us greatly. He's telling Peter to give everything he is so that this world might come to know the saving that Peter himself has received. We today, all of us who claim to love Christ, have the same call upon our lives. Jesus says, look at your lives. Look at your mistakes. He points them out. He says, that wasn't very good, was it? But he doesn't do it to shame us, does he? Rather, he does it to show what a great deed has been done in our lives. He says to each of us, you have tried and tried, but how did that end? It inevitably failed. He says, I have redeemed you from even that. You are saved. He says this so that we would take stock of the price paid for us. Do you realize that the greatest miracle accomplished in this world has in fact been accomplished in you? This is what Jesus is trying to tell Peter. He's saying, do you realize that the greatest deed, the thing that is greater than anything I've ever done, has been accomplished in you? That there has never been a greater thing done than your saving? God's power is in the redemptive saving of those who have no right being saved. God's power is in the changing of a heart like yours and mine. I'd rather spend one Sunday morning in a church full of drug addicts and prostitutes that sing Amazing Grace, You Saved a Wretch Like Me, and mean it, than to live a life in a church flooded with millions of dollars and thousands of people who think they have everything right. The power and the miracle is in seeing a heart corrupted by the flesh and sin accomplish the feat of love and receive the transforming grace of God. It's to see someone who no one ever thought could ever possibly love another person step out, do something that is actually to their own detriment for the sake of loving someone else. That is the greatest miracle of all. Have you ever seen that? Where you see someone, you're going, they are never, ever going to do something for the sake of someone else. There is no way that person could ever possibly love anyone. They are so selfish and so self-centered and so full of themselves. And then you step in and look and see that Jesus has changed them in such a way that they step back and actually, wow, they actually gave up that for the sake of that person. That person doesn't even treat them very well. That is the miracle. Because you know what? I think there's a lot of people who are in this building, in this room right now, who are probably in that place. Who at one point in time or another, somebody probably could have said of you, I don't think I could ever see them loving someone at their own detriment. And that is the great miracle. That is the greater work. I'd rather worship in the church of the broken, where miracles are practiced every day, than to worship in a church that seems like they have it all together, but really throws up their walls, their boundaries, so that they're not actually honest with anybody. This is the true miracle. This is the greater work that we are called to accomplish. So Jesus, he looks to us. He sees us going about our lives as if he was never raised from the dead. He sees us come to salvation and go back to our nets, and he says, do you love me? Do you love me? Do we love the one that has died for us? Do we love the one who paid the price that we are so undeserving of receiving so that we might be free? Then Jesus says, feed my sheep. Don't waste it. Don't waste your life. Lay it all aside. Let your hopes and dreams be transformed. God doesn't say don't dream and hope, but rather He says, let your hopes and dreams be my hopes and dreams. Let me give you hopes and dreams. Things you can truly be excited in. Things that when they're actually fulfilled, you won't go back in 3 days and go, oh, the flowers died, time for another hope and dream. But you'll go, man, when does this ever end? Live your life for the sake of somebody else. Bring the bread of life to all. Be transformed. If you proclaim with your lips, I love you, Lord, then go about your life as if nothing changed, then we do just as Peter did and say, I never knew him. We have the power of the Spirit flowing through our veins because of the baptism of Christ. We have the power of God residing in us, transforming us. We have the power and ability to change lives. Do we hate the way that people are oppressed? The way that the poor go hungry? The way that children are mistreated? Do we hate the way that people are abused, beaten, or taken advantage of? Do the atrocities of this world abhor you and throw you into a fit of anger? Then let's quit talking about it. Quit telling Jesus that you love Him, and let's step out and love Him by loving the people around us and changing lives. Let's stop saying, this is an atrocity, and step into the atrocity and start affecting the atrocity until it's not so great of an atrocity anymore. Let's be the deliverer of grace to this world. Let's be the change that we wish so hard for. Let's be the one who feeds the sheep. Let's be the one who loves the world like Christ has loved us. The power of Christ has been given to us through His death and resurrection, through baptism into faith. So let us step up and be His presence to the world. Let's cast our nets aside and let's live and love like we've been loved.